Claire stepped onto her porch just as the first drops of autumn rain began to fall. The kind that made the air feel cold even if you wore layers. She hugged her sweater close and looked out at the empty street, wishing it didn't feel so quiet. Her husband Daniel was away again on another long business trip, and even though she had gotten used to the routine, something about this evening felt heavier than usual. Lately his trips were longer, his messages shorter, his voice more distant. And Claire felt like she was sharing a house with a shadow rather than a partner. She tried to convince herself she didn't mind. But deep down she felt a hollow space growing inside her, one she didn't know how to fill. As she stared into the soft glow of the streetlights, she heard the porch light flick on across the driveway. Ethan, her neighbor, stepped out holding a small toolbox he had forgotten outside earlier. He wasn't the type to say much, but he always had a gentle presence, the kind that made people feel safe without trying. He noticed her shiver and paused. "Claire, everything all right?" he asked, his voice low and warm. She forced a small smile, even though her chest felt tight. "Just getting some air." It was the simplest truth she could give. She didn't want to admit she felt lonely, or that the house felt too quiet, or that she had been hoping anyone would notice she wasn't doing as fine as she pretended. Ethan stepped down from his porch, the light catching the rain on his jacket. "Storm's starting early," he said, looking up at the sky. Then he glanced back at her with concern that seemed too real to ignore. "If you need anything, just knock. I mean it." His offer was simple and neighborly, but something in the way he said it made her feel warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't inappropriate. It was simply human, the kind of kindness that reaches a part of you didn't realize had gone numb. Claire nodded, trying not to show how much his sincerity affected her. "Thank you, Ethan. Really." He gave her a small smile, the kind that said he understood more than she said out loud, and walked back toward his doorway. Claire stayed on her porch, listening to the soft taps of rain on the railing, wondering why not a stranger, but someone who wasn't her husband, had made her feel more noticed in 5 minutes than Daniel had in months. She shook away the thought, feeling wrong for even letting it cross her mind. But the truth was stubborn. She missed being looked at. She missed being asked how she was. She missed being someone's priority, even if just for a moment. When she finally went back inside, the house felt colder than before. She walked through the living room, her fingers brushing the back of the couch. Noticing how quiet everything seemed without another presence, she tried turning on the television, but the noise only made the emptiness feel louder. She made herself tea, hoping the warmth would settle the uneasy ache in her chest, but even that didn't help. She kept replaying the short exchange with Ethan. Not because it was dramatic or intense, but because it was simple and human. She realized how starved she had become for simple human moments. She checked her phone. A single text from Daniel blinked on the screen, landed. "Hotel's fine. Busy tomorrow. Talk later." No call, no warmth. No sense that he missed her or even thought of her beyond routine updates. Claire typed a quick response. "Okay, good night," and put her phone face down so she wouldn't see the emptiness of the conversation staring back at her. She paced the living room for a while, trying to shake off the restlessness growing inside her, but nothing helped. Every corner of the house reminded her of how long she had been waiting for something to change, something to feel different, someone to show they cared. She wrapped her arms around herself and walked back toward the window. Watching the rain fall harder, the street becoming glossy under the lights. She could see Ethan's porch from where she stood. His light was still on, a soft yellow glow that somehow made the night feel a little less heavy. She didn't know him well, but she had always noticed things about him. The way he carried himself with quiet confidence, the way he always helped neighbors without waiting to be asked, the way he paid attention not in a dramatic way, but in the small ways that mattered. She remembered the time her mailbox door got stuck. And before she even thought to fix it, Ethan had noticed and repaired it without saying a word. Or the time she struggled to lift a heavy bag of soil for her garden, and he appeared out of nowhere to help before she even asked. He wasn't someone who tried to impress people. He simply noticed things. And tonight, when she had been standing alone on the porch trying not to feel forgotten, he noticed her. That realization hit her harder than she expected. She didn't want to feel drawn to someone who wasn't her husband, but she couldn't deny the comfort she felt knowing someone cared enough to ask if she was okay. She sighed and leaned her forehead against the cool window glass, wondering when her marriage had become something she had to endure instead of something she felt supported in. She didn't blame Daniel entirely. Life got busy. Careers demanded attention, but she couldn't ignore the growing space between them. And that space felt especially wide tonight. Outside, thunder rumbled softly, and the lights in her kitchen flickered for a moment. Claire stepped back, feeling her heart pick up speed as the house dimmed and brightened again. The storm was getting worse. She wrapped her sweater tighter, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she felt being alone during nights like this. She glanced once more at Ethan's house, the steady glow of his porch light somehow comforting even from a distance. She wondered if he had gone inside or if he was still awake. She wondered if he was thinking about her the way she couldn't stop thinking about the simple kindness he had shown earlier. She shook her head and walked away from the window, trying to focus on anything else. She didn't realize it yet, but something had quietly shifted inside her that evening. Something small, but powerful enough to change the way she saw the days ahead. She didn't know it, but the moment Ethan asked if she was all right, a new chapter began forming in her life. One she hadn't planned for, one she didn't fully understand yet, but one that would soon take her down a path she never expected. And as the storm grew stronger outside, Claire felt something inside her begin to change to something she couldn't name, but could no longer ignore. The next morning arrived with gray skies and a cold wind that rattled the windows. And Claire woke with the uneasy feeling that the storm hadn't truly ended. She walked into the kitchen, still tired from a restless night, and reached for the kettle, hoping a warm drink would calm her nerves. Just as the water began to heat, the lights flickered once, then again, and suddenly everything went dark. The silence that followed felt too deep for a simple power outage, and Claire stood still for a moment, listening to the hum of the storm outside. With Daniel away and no one to help her figure out what to check first, she felt a rush of worry she didn't want to admit. She tried opening the curtains for a little light, but the sky was so heavy with clouds that the room stayed dim and chilly. She took a slow breath, trying to stay calm, but the empty house made every small sound echo. Before she could decide what to do, a firm but gentle knock came at the front door. For a moment she hesitated, her heart jumping at the unexpected noise. But when she opened the door, Ethan stood there with rain on his jacket and a lantern in his hand, looking like he had been waiting for her to answer. "Power's out across the street," he said with a soft smile. "Thought you might need this." Claire felt her shoulders loosen with relief as she took the lantern. Its warm glow filled the doorway, instantly chasing away some of the darkness. "You didn't have to come all the way over," she said, though she was grateful he had. Ethan shook his head. "I figured you might not want to sit here in the dark alone." His tone wasn't pushy or dramatic. It was genuine, simple, and steady, and it hit her harder than she expected. She let him inside without thinking about it too much, and they sat at the kitchen table with the lantern, casting a soft circle of light that made the room feel smaller, cozier, and less stormy. Claire didn't know how it happened, but the moment they sat down, talking became effortless. Ethan asked how she was handling the storm, and somehow that simple question opened a door she hadn't realized she'd been holding shut. She told him about the power outage, how Daniel was gone again, and how she felt a little overwhelmed today. She didn't go into deep personal details, but Ethan listened as if every word mattered, as if her thoughts weren't something to brush off or rush through. He didn't jump in to fix anything or offer big speeches. He just let her talk, nodded at the right moments, and asked small but thoughtful questions. She learned things about him too, how he grew up in a small town in Oregon, how he worked from home most days, how he liked noticing small details about the world because he believed they told more of the truth than big moments did. The storm outside kept tapping against the windows, but inside, the lantern's warm glow made everything feel steady. Claire realized she couldn't remember the last time she had talked with someone this easily. She wasn't trying to impress him or hide anything. She was just being herself, and Ethan seemed to see her in a way she hadn't felt seen in a long time. and that scared her more than she expected. She caught herself smiling too much, leaning forward without thinking, enjoying his presence more than she should. A small flicker of guilt pricked her as she remembered Daniel, even though he had barely spoken to her in days. Claire stood up suddenly, needing space to breathe. "I should check on a few things," she said, though she wasn't even sure what needed checking. Ethan stood too, not pushing, not asking questions, just offering a quiet nod. "Of course. I'll head back before the rain gets worse," he said, and she could tell he sensed her shift in mood. He handed her one last piece of the lantern's glow with a reassuring smile. "If you need anything, you know where I am." It was the same gentle offer he had made the night before, but now the words felt heavier, more complicated, wrapped in something neither of them dared name. Claire walked him to the door, and as she watched him step into the rain and cross the driveway, her chest tightened in a confusing mix of gratitude and fear. When she closed the door behind her, she leaned against it, trying to understand why her heart felt unsteady. Ethan had done nothing wrong. He had simply shown kindness during a difficult morning. But the way her heart reacted to that kindness, that was what unsettled her. She wasn't falling for him. She wouldn't let herself. She was simply lonely, overwhelmed, and touched by the simple attention he gave. She walked back to the kitchen, the lantern flickering softly, making the room look warm despite the storm outside. But no matter how much she told herself, it was nothing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The house still felt quiet, but now the quiet wasn't just loneliness. It was awareness. Awareness of how long it had been since someone had looked at her with sincerity. Awareness of how much she missed emotional closeness. Awareness of how easily Ethan had stepped into the space Daniel used to fill without even trying. Claire wrapped her hands around the lantern and stood still, listening to the rain grow heavier, feeling that small, undeniable ache in her chest. She didn't understand what was happening or what it meant. But she knew one thing with uncomfortable clarity. The storm outside wasn't the only storm she was facing. Something inside her had been touched gently, unexpectedly, and now she couldn't unfeel it. And she sensed that whatever this feeling was, it wasn't going away anytime soon. Days passed after the storm, and the memory of Ethan's quiet presence stayed with Claire in ways she hadn't expected. Daniel's calls were brief and distracted, filled with details of work schedules and meetings, never lingering long enough to make her feel noticed or missed. She tried to focus on her daily routine grocery shopping, tidying the house, watering her plants, but no matter what she did, her thoughts kept returning to Ethan. It wasn't a romantic pull exactly, at least not in a way she could name. But it was the warmth of being seen and understood that Daniel no longer offered. On Thursday afternoon, the sky turned an uneasy gray again, and Claire found a small package at her front door. A paper bag containing fresh muffins and a folded note in careful handwriting. She unfolded it with curiosity and a flicker of hesitation, reading the words, "You deserve good things." Her chest tightened as a small smile crept onto her face. The message wasn't overbearing, it wasn't flirtatious or dramatic, it was simply kind. The way Ethan's presence had reached out to her without demanding anything now felt tangible in her hands. She carried the bag inside, set it on the kitchen table, and ran her fingers over the note. It was strange how a few words could feel heavier than any of Daniel's texts, which only informed and rarely comforted. Later, she couldn't resist the pull to see him, to tell him she appreciated the gesture in person. And she found herself walking across the driveway with the bag still in her hands, her steps quick but hesitant. Ethan opened the door with surprise, his eyebrows lifting when he saw her. "Claire, everything okay?" He asked, a note of concern in his voice. I just wanted to thank you for this," she said, holding up the bag. He glanced down, then back at her, a soft smile forming on his lips. "You didn't have to, but I'm glad it helped a little." They stepped inside his cozy living room, the soft light from a small lamp creating an intimate space between them. Claire could feel her pulse quicken, a mixture of excitement, guilt, and the strange comfort of sharing a space with someone who seemed to understand her without needing explanations. They sat on the sofa, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan said quietly, "You seem different. Happier, maybe?" Claire laughed softly, a little embarrassed. Happier is a strong word. But calmer, maybe less. Alone. His eyes softened as if he understood more than she realized. They talked about everyday things at first, light topics, and then gradually. She felt herself opening up in ways she hadn't in years. She spoke of Daniel's busy schedule, the quiet gaps in their conversations, and the subtle distance that had grown between them over time. Ethan didn't interrupt or offer advice unless she asked. He simply listened, really listened, and that was something Claire had forgotten how to feel, heard fully and sincerely. She noticed little details about him while they spoke, the way he tilted his head when he focused, the small gestures of kindness he made unconsciously, the way his eyes softened when he smiled. Each observation made her chest ache in a way she didn't understand. After a while, the conversation shifted to lighter, more personal memories, places he had traveled, moments from her childhood she hadn't shared with anyone, books they loved. Somehow, the words came out freely, and the air between them felt charged, yet comfortable. The kind of connection that doesn't demand anything but simply exists. Claire felt herself leaning in a little, laughing at his jokes, and marveling at how easy it was to feel safe, noticed, and valued. Then she caught herself a pang of guilt stabbing through the warmth. She reminded herself that Daniel was her husband, that her heart belonged to someone else, and yet the truth was undeniable. Ethan's presence stirred something she hadn't felt in a long time. When she finally stood, needing a moment to breathe, Ethan rose as well, not saying anything, just letting her move. "I should probably head back," she said, her voice betraying her hesitation. "Of course," he replied softly. His eyes lingered on hers, warm and steady, and she realized that moment, simple as it was, carried weight neither of them wanted to admit aloud. She thanked him again, awkwardly, and stepped back across the driveway. That night, Claire found herself replaying every word, every gesture, every glance, feeling an ache that was both sweet and painful. She realized she had been starving for attention and understanding. Not the kind that demands, not the kind that expects, but the quiet, genuine kind that Ethan offered effortlessly. Over the next day, she tried to focus on chores, errands, and the small tasks of life, but her mind kept drifting back to him. She found herself thinking about what he would say about trivial things, how he would react to her moods, how simply sitting near him made her feel lighter, more herself. It wasn't love yet, but it was the seed of something undeniable. Later that evening, she went out to water the garden and saw Ethan sitting on his porch, reading under the soft glow of a lamp. She walked over without much thought, drawn by the unspoken pull. "Hey," she said quietly. He looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made everything else blur into the background. "Hey," he replied, not moving closer, but leaving space that felt safe. She stood for a long moment, unsure of what to say next. I don't know how to explain it," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. He tilted his head, listening. "Explain what?" "This, everything. How easy it is to talk to you. How hard it is to talk to him. I don't know why it feels like this." Ethan didn't rush her, didn't try to solve anything. He simply nodded, as if understanding exactly what she meant. "Sometimes the heart notices things we don't," he said softly. "It doesn't need reasons, it just does." She blinked, surprised by the simplicity and truth in his words. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't sadness. It was release. The bottled-up longing, the invisible weight she had carried for weeks, suddenly found a voice in that moment. Ethan didn't reach for her or try to change the conversation. He simply held space for her emotions. The quiet understanding between them deepened the intensity of the moment, making the night feel charged with unspoken truths. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered almost to herself. He gave a small, steady smile, his eyes kind and unwavering. "Then start with what's true," he said. The words sank into her chest. She realized that Ethan's presence wasn't about replacing, Daniel, or making a choice for her, it was about awakening honesty within her, making her face what she had been ignoring for too long. The emptiness in her marriage and the small, bright spark that Ethan had ignited inside her. She nodded, breath catching, and walked back toward her house, feeling both frightened and alive in ways she hadn't for years. That night she didn't sleep well, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. But for the first time in a long time, she felt awake, not because of anxiety, but because something essential inside her had stirred. It wasn't love, it wasn't desire, but it was the recognition of her own needs, her own feelings, and the realization that life could offer moments of warmth even when she felt abandoned. And as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she knew her days were about to change, though she didn't yet know how. And she felt a quiet anticipation for the truth that Ethan's presence had revealed. Asterisk by the third night. Claire felt the weight of her emotions pressing heavier than ever. Daniel's calls had grown even shorter, hurried, almost dismissive. And his voice over the phone sounded more like a stranger than the man she married. She tried to tell herself she was being unreasonable, that this was normal, that he was busy and she just needed to be patient. But her heart refused to accept the excuses. She moved through her house mechanically, making tea, checking the mail, and glancing at her phone, expecting messages that never came. The quiet was no longer just loneliness. It was clarity, painful and illuminating. She realized that over the past week she had been waiting not for him, but for acknowledgement, for connection, for the small things that made her feel seen. And Daniel wasn't giving her any of that. Her thoughts inevitably drifted to Ethan, to the gentle way he had entered her life. And she felt a complicated warmth swell inside her. That evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the soft yellow glow of the streetlights. And Claire felt a restless pull she couldn't ignore. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and, without much thought, walked across the driveway toward Ethan's porch. He was there, sitting quietly, a cup of coffee in his hand, gazing at the sky as if he had been waiting for this moment too. Claire stopped a few feet away, unsure how to begin, but knowing that if she didn't speak now, she might never find the words at all. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. Ethan's eyes met hers, steady and calm, not pushing, just listening. "Of what?" he asked, and she felt the honesty in his question, the safety in his presence. "Of how easy it is to talk to you, of how much it hurts that I can't feel this way with him. Of everything I've been ignoring for so long," she whispered. Her words tumbled out, unpolished but true, and for the first time in weeks she didn't feel ashamed of them. Ethan didn't move closer or offer empty comfort. He simply held her gaze, letting the truth of her feelings exist without judgment. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly, "but you owe yourself honesty." Claire felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so long pretending that the distance between her and Daniel didn't matter, that she was content, that she was patient. But standing here with Ethan, admitting her fear, she realized she had been deceiving herself. The emotions inside her were real, demanding recognition, and Ethan's presence had given her the courage to face them. She inhaled shakily, trying to steady herself. "What's true is that your kindness woke something in me. Something I thought I had lost," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, a warm, understanding smile crossing his face. He didn't move closer, didn't reach for her hand. And yet the connection between them felt palpable, charged with everything that had been left unsaid until now. "Then follow that truth," he said, his voice steady, "wherever it leads." The simplicity of his words struck her deeply. They weren't instructions or ultimatums, just guidance toward her own honesty, toward facing the realities she had been avoiding. Claire felt tears welling, not of sadness alone, but of release, recognition, and a strange kind of hope. For the first time, she acknowledged the emptiness in her marriage without guilt and allowed herself to consider that she deserved attention, warmth, and connection. They stood there in silence, the soft glow of his porch light surrounding them, the quiet hum of the neighborhood settling in around them. It wasn't romantic in a dramatic way, but it was intimate in a way that mattered: more honesty, vulnerability, understanding. Claire knew that the path ahead wouldn't be simple. She didn't know how she would address her feelings with Daniel, how the truth of her loneliness would affect their marriage, or whether she would be able to reconcile the bond she still held with him. But she did know that she could no longer ignore the awakening inside her. Ethan had reminded her what it felt like to be emotionally seen, and that was a truth she couldn't put back into hiding. When she finally turned to leave, walking back toward her house with her heart pounding and her hands shaking, she felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She knew she had to confront the realities of her marriage and make decisions that aligned with her honesty. And even though the path was uncertain, she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, aware of her own feelings, desires, and needs. As she closed the door behind her, she leaned against it for a moment, feeling the weight of everything she had discovered about herself. Daniel's absence had been heavy, almost unbearable, but it had led her to recognize a spark that Ethan had gently nurtured. She realized that life wasn't about ignoring unmet needs or tolerating emptiness. It was about acknowledging emotions, seeking connection, and allowing herself to be fully human. That night, Claire lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation with Ethan over and over. She understood that the coming days would require courage, honesty, and difficult conversations. But for the first time in a long time, she felt prepared to face them. Her heart was awake, alert, and willing to confront truths she had long buried. She thought about Ethan, about his unwavering kindness, the way he listened without judgment, and the quiet strength he offered simply by being present. She thought about Daniel, about the space that had grown between them, and the realization that love without attention, without acknowledgement, was not enough to sustain her. The night felt alive with possibility, and though uncertainty loomed large, Claire embraced it with a sense of fragile hope. She knew she couldn't predict what would happen next, how her marriage would unfold, or whether she and Ethan would ever cross paths again under different circumstances. But she also knew that she had been given a rare gift: clarity. She understood that life demanded honesty, courage, and the willingness to face one's emotions without fear. And in that understanding, she felt a quiet strength rising within her. She drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming not of Daniel or Ethan alone, but of herself navigating a path she had never dared to explore, guided by her own heart, her own truth. By morning, the first rays of sun lit her bedroom with a gentle warmth, and Claire woke with a sense of purpose. She knew she would need to talk to Daniel to confront the emptiness she had been feeling. And she also knew she would carry the memory of Ethan's kindness as a reminder of what emotional connection felt like. Her heart was no longer dormant, no longer passive, and that made all the difference. As she got ready for the day, Claire felt a mix of fear, anticipation, and excitement, a cocktail of emotions she hadn't experienced in a long time. She realized that life could surprise her in unexpected ways, that people could touch her heart without intending to, and that honest to painful, necessary. And liberating was the first step toward any meaningful change. And though the future remained uncertain, Claire understood that her heart had finally woken up. And from that awakening came the courage to face life, love, and the difficult choices that lay ahead. Nothing would ever be the same, and for the first time in years, she didn't mind. The awakening inside her was quiet yet undeniable, a promise of self-awareness, honesty, and emotional fulfillment that she could no longer ignore. And she stepped into the day ready to face whatever came next with her heart fully awake.